Welcome to Philosophy from the Frontline. This podcast explores the intersection of philosophy, entrepreneurship, and veteran transition. Join us as we delve into the minds of successful entrepreneurs who have made the journey from military service into small business ownership. Our guests will share their insights, experience, and unique perspectives on life, business, and the world around us. Through deep conversations and thought-provoking discussions, we hope to inspire and empower our listeners to tackle their own challenges and achieve their dreams. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the world of entrepreneurship from a veteran's point of view. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 73. And we're going to get back to the interviews and veterans transition, but we're going to talk about something that affects you as well, and that is politics. Now, the first thing that I will caveat is I'm going to lead this by saying, look, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle that you're registered on, Democrat, Republican, or Independent. Understanding the issues is truly the way to understand how you should vote. And I'm not going to tell you, hey, you should vote a certain way because of the color of your skin or the reason or the region that you live in or where you came from, because all that has been a recipe for disaster for millions of people in this country because they refuse to dive deeper into the actual issues that they face in an election year. So I'll caveat that by saying, look, how do politics affect you? And for many, many years when I was in the uniform, I didn't vote. And the reason why I didn't vote, because it didn't matter, because whoever was a POTUS was a person that I had to take, orders from. And then about halfway through my career, I was like, you know what? Yeah, I may not want, I may support or not support the president. However, as the POTUS, that's my opportunity to vote in my leader. And so at about 10 or 15 years, that's when I started paying more attention to politics and started voting with or without, the outcome happening. And unfortunately for me, I will say fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how you look at it, I was operationally deployed through 3 election cycles. And I can tell you that they were drastically different coming out of George Bush into Barack Obama's first term, going into Barack Obama's second term, and then the transition from Obama to Trump. There was a marked difference in the way that the military was treated. So as a service member, if you're wearing the uniform, understanding who you're voting for is very, very important. And any influence that you could, communicate effectively to your family on voting is very, very important. A lot of people were like, I just don't vote because it doesn't matter. And, when you look at the voter turnout rate in 2020, which is still, regardless if you agree or disagree with the outcome, it's still suspect because 150 million people in our country voted. That's a 50% voter turnout. I don't think we've ever had that in the history of modern elections. And so that fact in and of itself should make you question the outcome. Not for any other reason than half the country went to the polls. If you believe that, then I understand that you may have a position, but I can also say that there have been some audits that have happened, and 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when both, Bush, or not Bush, but both when Trump and Biden are dead and gone, the truth is going to come out. And then everybody's going to oh my gosh, how did this happen? Well, because politics, right? Politics affects you regardless of what side of the aisle that you're on. And this whole discussion is to give you a little bit of more information. It's our perspective. You can agree, you can disagree, but at the end of the day, we're 2 guys that kind of watch it from a different perspective. But Dave, what are your thoughts just initially on how politics affects you here in America?
Well, a lot of people don't grasp this one particular concept of all, and that's that, government is force. Straight up. Government is not innovative. They don't create anything. They only consume. That's it. And to top it off, they operate at zero risk to their own best interests. Ever. They use taxpayer dollars to do as what they feel fit that benefits them later. I think the best example of that is Ukraine. Now, people are emotionally hijacked into thinking that we are somehow helping the Ukrainians. We are not. This is a perfect example of government helping themselves. What do you think is going to happen to all that money when that war is over and all the reconstruction contracts come pouring in? Who owns those companies that's going to do that job? Who's going to mandate that? Right? And all that money is getting laundered right back into somebody else's pockets. And that's what government does. They consume and they grow. Under Obama had negative GDP 8 years. For 8 years. And that's including the quantitative easing program that we had by a private bank called the Federal Reserve. Yep. And none of that is my opinion. Somewhere in that time frame, that single man's administration doubled our debt. And nobody cried about it, but they cried about it when Bush did it right before he took office, and he bailed out Ford, which he had no business picking a winner or a loser. So government's force. It is force, and it is to be feared. What is war? Well, it's an extension of policy. Right? If you're talking to all you super geniuses that think you're smart because you read, von Clausewitz.
Yeah, warfare is simply this. It is the brutal end of political action, right?
It is a political action if you're a local elected representative.
Yeah.
Period. That's them having an interest in it and wanting you to go along. So, a lot of people see government as their savior. They think it's going to save their town when it actually has nothing to do with that. You want to be active in government? Do it at the local level. You want a real change? Get control of your school districts.
Yeah, well,
get a hold of your county tax assessor's office.
Well, and that's
get a hold of your county judge.
Right.
That's where government really meets the road when it comes to the individual living in the community.
Yeah.
But in the end, as much as it pains me, and it brings me no pleasure saying any of that. Regardless, by God, we live in the greatest country in the fucking world because of the type of government which we possess. Every single government body in the rest of the planet is a unitary system that ends with one person, except for ours. We have checks and balances. There are 3 branches of government. So you can't have one party that grows dominance and then just starts voting away the rights and property of the 49%. And we are protected. That's exactly why people build rafts out of recyclable materials at the local junkyard to flee here. We got the best. We can bitch about it all day.
Yeah. Well,
but we have to respect government for what it is. If we don't, it's a ruthless master, to quote Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, one of the advantages that we do have is the fact that we have the ability to speak out on the government, whether we like it or we dislike it, right?
That's right.
Not everybody has that same luxury. And
go ahead and protest the government on the street corner in Germany. Watch what happens to you. Yeah. Bullets are going to come by. They're going to knock your teeth out, man.
Yeah.
Flat out.
And that's the nature of the rest of the world. And one of the disadvantages that we have is because we're so privileged and we have so much access, we shelter ourselves from all the negative aspects of the rest of the world, right? Like we automatically assume, it's got to be similar to the way that it is here because they're in the West. We use that broad term, the West, as part of a country's background or upbringing. And part of the issue is it's like, look, there are certain things that we see, on a daily basis that should make you ask a question, right? Like, hey, local police officer gets into a shootout with, local person X over some ridiculous law that was passed. And it goes back to your point about the local magistrates or local judges or local city ordinance or whatever. It starts there and it stretches all the way up to the federal government. So if you don't like something that's going on in your locality, step 1 is vote local, right? That's the first part.
You have to, man. You got to be in those polls. Otherwise, you're getting really screwed by not doing it.
Know who's know who is involved and do background and check the source of where the information is coming from as well, right? Because I know North Carolina has I think it's the 50 feet or 75 or 100 feet. I don't know exactly what it is, but you're not allowed to basically lobby or present information to people as they're coming to and from the polls in North Carolina, right? And for me, it's pretty easy. I'm not going to say that I vote down ballot Republican or Democrat, but the reality of it is I try and look at the issues, look at the people with the best background, and provide the person who's going to give me the best policy for the time that they're in office. And that should be how you approach voting as a citizen in this country. Don't vote for the person that's, because there's so much sleight of hand in government that's all tied to dollars, like you said before, right? And part of the problem is it's like, hey, look, if you hear what is said, and I'll use student loan forgiveness as an example, right? Hey, I want to forgive student loans for people that make $150,000 a year or less. Okay, well, that sounds good, but who's going to pay for that? Because that's federally funded.
Man, I took on that subject in university, man, with some professor talking about, it'll be free and we should do that. It should be that way. I said, oh, no kidding. I said, so you're going to work for free then?
Yeah. Well,
and man, his jaw dropped. He's like, well, of course not. I wouldn't dare do that. Oh, no kidding. And who's paying you?
Yeah. Well, how are we supposed to pay you if
so I have to pay that, right?
Correct.
And man, I told him, I said, perhaps it's best you keep your good ideas out of the classroom and just teach the subject.
Yeah, but the bottom line is the sleight of hand that the government uses is simply this, right? Hey, I'm going to do this student loan forgiveness for people that make $128,000 or less, or whatever the number was, right? Doesn't matter what the number is, because at the end of the day, as a taxpayer, you're going to end up paying for it anyway, right? So you may as well pay off the loan, because the loan has a much lower interest rate than what's going to get hit on your taxes. And that's the thing that people don't realize. Like, oh my gosh, I have $30,000 in school loans that I have to pay off. Well, guess what? Maybe you shouldn't have took an intro to basket weaving class and done something, that was more beneficial to society, that allows you to produce money. Because that's one of the problems that we have too, is like people go into college and the federal subsidies of higher education is why it takes 6 years for a person to graduate from college on average. And they have so much debt because they know that they're going to get you. You know what I mean? It's like a police officer stopping a soldier right outside the gate of the military base and writing him a ticket. He knows he's going to pay that ticket, right? Because the kid doesn't want to get in trouble. So the soldier's going to pay the ticket because it's much, much easier to have it adjudicated in the civilian court. And you could probably have more wiggle room than you could if your chain of command got involved.
It depends. And government's morphed a lot. The political spectrum's morphed a lot. They've gotten away with a lot. As I was talking about earlier, Obama, 8 years of negative GDP. The growth that did take place during his administration was Washington, D.C. Tripled, right? The growth, like a virus around D.C. And that's where all the money's at, right? We don't even look at it in terms of understanding what our documents do for us. And I always encourage people, never mind a damn thing I tell you. Doesn't matter. It takes an hour to read through our founding documents, an hour to read the Constitution, to understand how this country is supposed to operate. I think the greatest disservice I ever saw, this is my number one beef, was watching the Democrat primary when it first happened. And if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, there were like 11 people on stage. Biden was one of them. Harris was one of them, amongst others, Gillibrand, etc. The question by the moderator was, who here is willing to give health care benefits to people crossing the border illegally? Every single one of them raised their hands. And while people cheered, the number one thing they failed to understand was not one of those people on that stage represented them. And they didn't understand it. They're representing some foreign country's citizens. And if they don't understand this, I'll make it even clearer. There's not a country in the world, not one, whose political duty is to care for, right, feed and educate another country's citizens, that has legally no say in how we operate. And that's the greatest disservice that we see today. Why do you think they won't fix that border here in the great state of Texas? Because if they do, you think they're going to get the same budget dollars they got last year, Border Patrol or the Department of Homeland Security? No. If they stop drugs from coming into this country, they can't even keep them out of a prison. If they keep it out of the country, I mean, what will happen to the DEA? They'll go away. They can't spend that money anymore. So it's aside from being now it's an obvious exclusive club. They're not operating like a government. They're operating like a business.
Yeah. Well, and they're pulling.
And that business is to enrich who and protect who. And then none of that, is a duty. You have only one duty, and that's adherence to our founding documents and the protection and security maintained of the citizenry of this country that votes. Right? If I always was of the opinion, if every illegal that came across that damn fence, if they were Democrat voters, or excuse me, not Democrat voters, but Republican voters, that border would have been sealed up like a friggin' drum decades ago.
Yeah.
But they all have an interest in it. All of them. They all have an interest in it. Both sides. Remember, both sides are sending money to Ukraine. Not even in NATO.
Well,
right?
and that's a huge problem, right? So one of the things that so back to your previous point, the first part of it is like, look, the open border, that's not national security, period. At the end of the day, that is our president's responsibility, and everybody that works within the government needs to be enforcing the border. You can't, like, look, why do you have locks on your doors? Because locks keep honest people honest, right? So if I have a border barrier, yes, there's still going to be people that are going to be bound and determined to get through, but the number will be much lower. Like, why? Because if it's difficult to do, then they're not going to do it, right? Like, even
and I tried to explain that to somebody the other day. But walls don't work, Dave. Oh, really? I wonder what the crime rate is in a gated community versus the crime rate in my neighborhood. I guarantee you they're different.
Yeah.
I guarantee you one of them's got a bigger problem than the other.
Well, and the other piece of
there's a reason there's a gate around the White House.
But walls don't work, right?
Whatever. That's a cool story, bro.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the problem. So when you look at, does your political party matter, right? Political party at this point, no. And I say that because you basically have those that are in politics and those that aren't, right? And that's basically it. And if you are a citizen of this country, then you're not part of the government. I know people that are adamant about not using the term public school or public transportation. The reason why they don't use those words is because they aren't necessarily public, right? Because we're all part of the public, but we're not all part of the government. And so there's a big distinction between that. So, for example, like if you or I fly anywhere on an airplane, guess what? We got to go through TSA. We're responsible for responding to all the security regulations, humana, right? If somebody in DC wants to go on a trip, what do? They basically either fly in a private plane, they're first class, all their stuff is expedited, or, in the pinnacle of political leadership in our country, you just jump on Air Force One, right? There is no, I guarantee you that Joe Biden's not taking his shoes off, or any president for that matter, is taking their shoes off for a security inspection when boarding Air Force One. They're not, because it's a secure platform. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that there needs to be much higher levels of security for, leaders that have access to nuclear effing codes, right? Like, we've got to acknowledge that. However, you shouldn't enforce the same thing on the citizenry. And that's one of the issues that we have, is the citizenry is always going to get caught in the middle of whatever debate it is. Look at it this way. This has been
the TSA.
Yeah.
How about that? TSA never stopped a single terrorist assault. Not a one. And yet here they are, shaking down citizens using that aircraft.
Yeah, and it's a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment, because they don't have
horrible.
They don't have a legitimate reason to be inspecting, right? And that's a completely different argument. Some people are like, well, I like the security, I don't like the security. At the end of the day, it's an inconvenience, but it's also a very expensive one because it's tied to taxpayer dollars, right?
One that you got to pay for too,
right?
So you want to fly, you have to give up.
Yeah, well, and the other part of it is like, hey, if I want to expedite this, what do? I got to pay the government money to avoid the line, right? I got to do a background check and send in all my documentation, show us your papers so we can expedite you. Like at that point, I'll just, at the end of the day, they make it so cumbersome that there's no easy way around the system. And that is the government. Like that's the way our government works. When you look at things that happen, and one of the things that I have noticed, even as, not paying attention completely to politics till I got a little bit older, but one of the things that did happen, and this, you've been around long enough to know that the color switch happened, right? So at one point, Republicans used to be blue and Democrats were red. But if you look at any map in 2020, it is now reversed. And why did they do that? Because there's a point in time where Republicans were gaining momentum politically. So the color switch happened. And guess what? That is the media. That's fake news before Trump even said it, right? Yeah. Guys reinforcing a mentality or an idea that creates negativity.
I always thought that was the funniest thing ever. Is the dumb, even on its face, it's ridiculous. You have a political party that liberates you, and what do the liberated do? Well, they turn around and they vote for their oppressor.
Yeah,
it's as fake as can be. Another big one was women's suffrage, and people equate that to the Constitution as this evil document because it says women can't vote. It says absolutely nothing of the kind. Nothing the kind. Every state has their own constitution that it's built on. And during the time when women's suffrage had began, there was only one state where it literally had written in its founding documents that women did not have the right to vote. Should I be mistaken, I believe it was Delaware.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's home state. What do you know about that? Old white men running government.
Like, why does that surprise me? Yeah. True story. Am I for the suffrage movement? Absolutely. Everybody should be able to vote. Everybody has rights. Equal rights. Absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, but what has happened is even with our founding documents, the scourge of postmodernism has destroyed the term. So if I say, hey, look, that all men are created equal, that includes women, that includes children, that includes every race, creed, color on the planet, right? But because we have to have this postmodernist spin on everything, all men created equal, we need to amend the Constitution to say women. Okay, go for it. Have a convention of states. Propose that freaking amendment to make the change to the document. Nobody would be opposed to that. But because you don't have...
That's the law.
Right? Because you have no knowledge of the law, all you're going to do is bitch about it on Twitter, or on Instagram and say, oh, how men are trying to hold me down and the patriarchy this and the patriarchy that. Have you proposed an amendment to the Constitution to change the preamble? No.
Oh, and by the way, the preamble, I wouldn't really call it so much. It's more of a Dear John,
Yeah, but I find it interesting though that we live in a country of you don't get a dollar service for $1 tax, right? So for every dollar that the U.S. government takes from you tax wise, or the government, whether it be state or federal, you don't get that dollar in return in services.
There was a massive disaster, a natural disaster under Obama. I think it might have been Haiti, where Haiti got tore up bad by a hurricane. And there was a White House initiative to send relief down there under Obama. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it came out later that of all the money that was poured into this government charity, only 15% of it made it across the water where it actually put food on the table to help somebody in need of relief.
Yeah.
Right? Where the hell did that money go? Where'd that money go? What was it? Was that like a processing fee for charity?
Yeah.
Whose pockets did that crap go into? It's stuff like that really makes people lose faith in government. People used to hate on Christians, until Hurricane Katrina happened. And what was the number one, no BS, legit place your money went? You spent $1. $1 got spent on the ground. And that was all because of Christian organizations. And Bush got lambasted for that. That somehow made people upset.
Yeah. Well,
and what does that say about emotional control and why it's important that people are emotionally driven so they can't understand what even right and wrong is anymore?
Yeah. Well, and what it is people. It's about comfort, man. That's all it is. It's about comfort. When you look up things like you were talking about, like you can pull up the one of the biggest issues with the Haiti earthquake relief that happened was it was tied to the Clinton Foundation.
Well, they were also involved, yeah.
Right. So
that's true. And Bush Senior was also a part of that.
Correct.
Should I remember correctly?
So at what point, how much money of that actually, made it to its final destination? We don't know. And we know that
5%, maybe.
Yeah, well, we know that
Clintons were notorious for that.
Yeah, we know that the Bushes were tied to KBR as well. So they were like, oh well, yes. And those of us that have seen, Kellogg Brown and Root overseas, like they do some good stuff,
man.
But again, it's all about placement, access, and how do I win that government contract?
Well, it's even more than that. It's no compete. I just got into it with somebody on the line. They're talking about, well, we hate capitalism. And these dumbasses that doing it from their iPhone on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
You hate capitalism. What is it about capitalism that you hate? And they said, well, it's not that we hate capitalism, really. It's just we hate unfettered capitalism. I said, man, we don't have unfettered capitalism.
No.
There is regulation. There are thousands of regulations that govern the entrepreneurial space, and most of that is debated, ended, and born in Congress every year. So we have a SEC that governs our frickin' markets, an entire division of people specifically for that one thing. So we don't have unfettered, but we do have one problem. If there's one thing I really don't like or don't agree with is when you have winners and losers chosen by government. Ford should have went bankrupt.
Yep.
Bush Jr. had no business giving them money. Barack Obama had no business giving Goldman Sachs money for any reason. They should have failed. That's corrupt. That's corrupt as hell. Another example of that is what you just explained was no compete contracts. Who did Kellogg Brown and Root compete against to get that contract?
No one.
Dick Cheney owned a great stake in it.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Well,
that is the dark side of government. And how do they get away with it? Well, they own the FBI. You can call the cops on them. You can vote them out, but I don't think we'll ever expect to see justice.
No.
For that kind of activity.
No, you won't. And I mean, it's gotten to the point now where there's an app. And speaking of that, right, there's an app called Capital Trades. You can download it on your phone. You can pull it up on your website. And I'll drop all these in the podcast description. Capital Trades literally shows you what the politicians are investing in. And at what point. Right? Like, hey, look, you know what? If it's not insider trading, if they're doing it, then I'm watching trends and I invest where they invest. How is that wrong?
You can all thank the late John McCain for that. That's why they don't get popped.
Yeah, and these
for
guys
insider trading anymore.
And they should be underneath the prison, to be honest.
Absolutely.
But again, it goes back to what political ties it has.
Well, no, it's not even that, Robert. Who do they represent?
Yeah.
Who do they represent? If they're on the grift over some company, right, that they know is going to either go up or go down, so they can either sell it off, short it, or buy into it. I mean, who's going to do anything? Who's going to stop them? Better yet, are they representing you?
Yeah. Well,
I could assert to you that they don't.
Yeah. Well, here's another thing that I always find interesting, and we'll go back to John McCain because, like, hey, look, we're equal opportunity offenders here. So if you don't believe this, again, I will drop all the links in the podcast description. One of the things that happened is, when the UFC first came out, John McCain was a huge proponent of not supporting the UFC and all the things that were going on with it, right? And the reason why it was, does anyone know? Like, and everybody can always say, well, it's a brutal sport and blah, 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 blah. But the reality of it is because John McCain was a big advisor to Anheuser-Busch, and UFC was not using Anheuser-Busch products as a partnership, right, as a sponsor, it's very, very easy to see this growing sport that's burgeoning. Like, oh, these guys are gaining momentum. How do I stop that momentum? Right? So we don't want to be associated with them because they're not associated with us. Because I guarantee you, if that $100 million contract that Anheuser-Busch and UFC signed at the end of 2023 happened at the beginning, when UFC was first starting, we would have heard zero peeps out of John McCain.
Out of McCain. No, he was corrupt.
And it's sad to say that because, again, one of the difficulties that everybody has, and you hear the statement all the time, people go into politics to serve the people, they stay into politics to serve themselves. And that cannot be any truer than, our previous Democratic president, Barack Obama, and our current president, Joe Biden. And I say that for no other reason than all you have to do is do a simple Google search and see what happened. Barack Obama is the wealthiest president post-presidency than anyone. And he has established nothing. Hats off when you and I talked about this the other day. Jimmy Carter, at the very least, started Habitat for Humanity. And he may have
post-presidency, he's the greatest of all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. He's a very charitable man.
Yeah. Like Jimmy Carter took it upon himself to create a nonprofit that supported millions of people, right?
Directly.
Yeah.
Directly, with no BS involved. There's, precious metal, that home key.
Yeah.
Which in somebody's hand.
Which is huge. And so
it's unfortunate. He was a terrible president.
Yeah.
Not because he was a bad man, but because he was just so damn weak.
Yeah. And ultimately that's what it boils down to. Like, look, for me, when I look at a politician, I look at a politician's background. I look at the policies that they've passed and the policies that they've supported. And that truly, hopefully, in most cases, will kind of let you divine how they're going to be. There's very, very few staunch libertarians or staunch constitutionalists in DC. You've got the Rand Pauls, you've got the Ted Cruzes of the world, but then for every two people like that, you've got an Ilhan Omar and a Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So you have both polar opposites of people, probably the personality and the way that they live their life, but also the way that they provide decisions that they're going to make as far as legality or as far as supporting a package or whatever, and it's a damn shame, right? Because when you look at our country from Rand Paul all the way to, AOC, like those people actually legitimately, like you are doing something that not everybody has the opportunity to do, right? You have an opportunity to lead in this country and actually have an impact from the position that you're in, but yet and still, some people choose to, and I will never say I will 100% agree with anything that a politician says. However, there are things that Rand Paul and Ron Paul have both said over the time when they were in DC that I was like, I agree with that.
Hey, RFK,
right?
I like the hell out of that guy,
right?
And let me tell you, he's an anti-gun dude. He's a climate dude, but dude, at least he's a damn man, and he's very forthright about a lot of things. Quite frankly, I really agree with.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I think that's what people have been seeking. And that's what people thought that they were getting with Barack Obama. Like, hey, this guy's super accessible. He's, he talks about the things that he likes. He talks about basketball. He talks about the Super Bowl. He talks about he's this open person or more open person. And I would argue that, the open access to the president really started with Bill Clinton when he was on the campaign trail. And those of you guys that are young, you won't remember him being on the Arsenio Hall show playing saxophone. Those of us that are a little bit older, like, remember that. And like, hey, look, I may not have agreed with his policies, but Bill Clinton was a cool dude, man. Like what he portrayed. And I won't say that I agree with everything that he's done. I will caveat that up front. However, when the persona that he portrayed on the campaign trail running for office, Like you legitimately thought like, hey, this is like the coolest dude in the world, and he's gonna make.
No, he was an expert at doing that with people.
Yeah,
I agree with that too, and you know, I understand why he was appealing to a lot of people. And when you look, it's funny too, because when you look back, you know, I guess the real story is told over time. I used to not understand this then, but I think I see it now. He was actually more of a centrist than I would have ever given him credit for during his presidency.
What he was able to do was he was
more moderate.
He was able to rebrand the Partnership for America that Newt Gingrich came up with, right?
Mm.
The Partnership for America is really what saved him in the second term, you know. And the other part of it
is, but it was his first term was so disastrous. That's what's brought it on. People don't understand. The Democrat Party held dominant control of the House for 50 years before Clinton came around. And that's what was so significant about the contract with America that was led by Newt Gingrich.
Yep.
People don't understand that. Republican Party really didn't mean anything for decades.
Yeah.
You know.
And when that happened, really what it did was it created the environment that we see today in modern politics is like, hey, look, if a president's first term is not going strong, you can expect him to lose seats in the House and the Congress in the midterms and potentially either get voted out or lose more seats in his second term.
Right.
And the gridlock.
And that's why I say, you know, Reagan did such a great job because who was the House full of?
Yeah.
Both terms. Yep. Democrats, House and Senate.
But again,
right? And yet he made things happen, dude.
Well, the reason why he made it happen was because he was able to do what everybody in our modern era has failed to do, and that is present a compelling argument to both sides of the aisle and
get it done. No, he did it. He was the best at it, no doubt.
Well, and that's a real failure of government today, right? Like think of it, right?
I think that was the biggest failure of Obama, big time. He had a supermajority in the House and the Senate, and still couldn't get health care because they were all squabbling over their own crumbs. And then after that, nothing got done.
It was all about,
you know.
Well, it was all about what was in the pork belly, right? And that's what happened. And so when these guys are, you know, again, I fully expect you as a citizen, as a voter, to act in your self-interest, right? But read the fine print. You know, read the fine print because at some point it's going to come back to you in the form of taxes, right? And I will say this, and we can start wrapping this up, but the main thing that I would encourage people to look at is look at foreign aid dollars versus the amount of charitable giving that happens in this country. And you know what? When unfettered by the U.S. government, the American citizen will donate more money to charity than the government can ever donate internationally out of your taxes. And so if the government gets out of the way and you lower taxes, guess what people do? They're more philanthropic when they're prosperous, right? Guess what? I'm more likely to go out and buy something, you know, buy a meal for a stranger, like the guy that's sitting on the corner that like, help, I need food. I'm more willing to do that if I feel like my dollar is going to go a long way, or if that person is going to utilize, you know, that gift that I'm giving them for something positive. Right. And that's part of the problem. And you don't get that with government. If I give all my money to government, I can assure you that they're going to piss it away on something that I wouldn't want them to use it on. And that's
$500 hammers and stuff like that.
Right. But that was part of the Reagan administration too, right?
Yeah. Like, I know. Absolutely was.
You know, when they did the government audit of Reagan, and like when you look at it, I actually pulled it up. Like when you look at the chart of presidential debt, Ronald Reagan's debt exploded over the, you know, over the 8 years that he was in office, but he also had an end goal. What was the end goal of all of Reagan's spending? The collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So you saw a superpower fall shortly thereafter, you know, after Reagan got out of office, right? And when you look at, you know, the spending, most of the spending is associated to wars, right? Like,
you know, isn't that sad? The greatest victory in our country in the last 100 years was the Cold War.
Yeah.
Think about it. We didn't fire a single bullet One. That is
but that's
efficient perfection.
But that's also somebody sitting around looking at the broader aperture and making a decision to say, hey, look, this is the only way that we're going to do this. And again, being able to compromise and bring people to the table to make it happen. I don't see that happening. I don't see, like, even like, say for instance, if Trump or DeSantis if Trump gets elected or DeSantis gets elected, these guys are going to spend their first term. Well, Trump will probably spend his whole term as a president cleaning house.
I hope he does, baby.
Getting rid of all the cannon fodder.
Justice for all. Yep.
Bloated government organizations, that don't do anything. I saw somebody posted it on LinkedIn the other day, and I'll leave it with this. Is somebody asked, it's like, hey, how do you address, the Black Lives Matter movement? And I say that because that was a social construct that cost, taxpayers almost $100 million. People gave that organization almost $100 million. Where's Black Lives Matter stand today? They're bankrupt and blacklisted.
They got a mansion in Beverly Hills
and banned. Why? Because it was the grift. And what we've seen in the last 30 years is we've gone away from tangible things like, hey, this is what a law looks like. This is the process to do it. And we've tied it to how I feel rather than, hey, let's look at this logically, study the problem set, and come up with a solution that's not going to make everybody happy, because you're not going to be able to make everybody happy. But, it covers the bell curve, right? Like, that's really what we should be looking at. In every policy that we make, there's a bell curve. Everything underneath the bell curve is what we want to look at. There's going to be people on the extremes of the bell curve and outside of the bell curve that we can't help, regardless of how hard we try. Like, there's going to be people.
The squad would be outside that bell curve.
Correct.
They are not the norm.
Yeah. Well, think of it this way. You have a guy like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or any other, multi-billionaire, close to billionaire person in the world. There is no policy that you can pass that's going to change the price of a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk for those dudes, because they just don't care, right? Like, I saw it somewhere. Somebody was talking about it. If Jeff Bezos drops the keys to his car, it would be more efficient for him just to buy a new car than to pick the keys up off the ground, because he makes so much money, right? At one point when he was at this highest point at Amazon, right? Oh shit, I dropped my keys. Well, let me just buy a whole new car, because it would be faster and more efficient money-wise for him to spend the time to just buy a new car online than it would be for him to bend over and pick up the keys, right? That guy is unaffected by every decision made in DC, no matter how much you complain about it.
Right.
Like, if you tax that guy 30% for every $1 million that he makes, still doesn't matter.
Smart. Especially if he doesn't, like Elon Musk, he doesn't take a salary.
Yeah.
They wonder why he doesn't pay taxes. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Well, the other part of it is
smart. Yeah. You don't like it? You're an elected representative. Change the damn law.
Right. Well, and the other part of it is like, hey, the other reason why he doesn't take a salary is because the guy's so heavily subsidized by the U.S. government, he doesn't have to.
And that's why is he being subsidized? You see, that's another thing. Government subsidies. If I were to leave anybody with this audience, I would say this: please read the Constitution. Read it, and I mean, give it a good, healthy study. It won't take you all damn day. If you know anything, we do not have freedom. It's important for people to understand this. We do not have freedom, and nor do we want freedom. So what do we have? Well, we have freedom plus morality, which equals liberty. And liberty is what we have. You may not share we can talk about morals perhaps like you might in the Bible. Do not, steal, do not kill, don't covet your neighbor, etc. But what that also entails is you do not have the freedom to block my path of travel. You have the liberty to make your point known however you choose. That's fine. But if you're stopping me from getting to A to B, I should have every right to, activate your dental plan. Right? And people, I think, have lost sight of that. Well, I have a problem and I have a right to redress. So that means I have the liberty to affect you in how you want to move about your day. I can stop you and prevent you from going to work so you can't get paid because my feelings are hurt about whatever social project's going on in DC that don't mean a hell of beans to putting food on the table. And we see that all the time. And there's a huge misconflation as to what our rights really mean. All this fucking standing on the corners, screaming at people, spitting, wearing masks and terrorizing people to get your point across. One, ain't nobody's listening to you. You know, two, you'd have a much better success rate of affecting political change by contacting your local elected representative. And start there. Believe it or not, you have a representative of your state, not the federal government, but in your community that can affect change today.
Yep, city council.
Learn it. Yeah. Learn it. You don't like the way the police are acting? Engage your city council. The Metropolitan Police, they are hired force by that council. You really want the law? You better pay attention to your sheriff. He's actually voted into office.
Yeah.
You know, that's where you make that maneuver. Know the waters that you're swimming in.
Yeah, for sure.
And
my last point is back to what you just said, right? And I can't take credit for this, so I'll drop his link to his podcast on our podcast description is the Wilkow Majority. So if you ever want to hear a good monologue, listen to Andrew Wilkow. His podcast is always out every day. It takes his opening monologue from his radio show on Patriot. And I listen to him for one reason and one reason only. Because when he's done, he sends out a newsletter with all of his resources that he used to construct his show.
Receipts, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. But one of the things that he always says, and I'll leave it there, leave everyone with this, is your freedom to be you is my freedom to be from you, right? I don't have to engage with you if I don't want to. If I engage with you, it's because it's a choice that I'm making because I find something that you said interesting, compelling, whatever, right? At the end of the day, you know, as a citizen of the great republic that we live in, and that's another point, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. A democracy is 3 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. And so you got to realize that direct democracy has never succeeded anywhere in the world.
It's 51% of the people voting away the rights and property of the 49%. And to use your analogy, you know, 2 wolves and a sheep. In a republic, that sheep has a gun. Don't ever forget it. Mess around.
Yeah, and that's the difference is the other half of the 59 or the 49% has assurances from the rest of the construct of the republic to protect them from exactly that.
There's a great constitutional lawyer named Chrisanne Hall. She always said that the direct democracy only does 2 things. It ensures that there will always be slaves and that there will always be masters. And man, is she on it. She's on it.
Yep. It's so fair. All right, folks, this has been Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 73. We went a little bit long today. We talked about some politics. We didn't really get into the hot button issues, which is fine. But basically, we're kind of giving you like the cliff notes of how we view the world as far as policy is concerned. Like, look, I can assure you of the 536 people in Washington, D.C. that are responsible for making direction for this country. Not all of them are bad. Not all of them are good. You know, the vast majority of them we hope would be just in the middle, and the polar opposite extremes are the ones that need to be voted out, you know, or censured. And the censure can only happen from inside the Congress, so there's people that need to go. Like George Santos, I don't know 100% on that guy. I didn't do the research on him, but it doesn't seem like what he did was anything worse than what Elizabeth Warren did about lying about her background being a Native American. Bob Menendez.
There's 0 repercussions for that.
Yeah. Bob Menendez, on the other hand, sounds like he's in on the take and needs to go to prison. Right?
They're calling him Gold Bar Man. Gold Bar Menendez. Gold Rolexes and stuff. Yeah.
So the reality of it is like, look, it goes back to what we said before. Know the issues, know the policies that they vote on, know the direction that they vote on, so you have the best opportunity to represent yourself with the people that are going to DC to represent you. And, you know, it starts at the local level. So if you have the opportunity to vote in a local primary or to be a poll watcher or, sit in on a city council meeting with an important, vote that's coming up, by all means do all of that. It doesn't preclude you from being involved. Being involved in government is not, not making a podcast about politics, right? It's registering to vote, going to the polls, providing your vote as best as you can, and being an observer if you need to or have to. If you feel like your vote's not going to be properly counted, go through the process.
In fact, and you can contact your local representatives. I contact mine all the time. Here's John Carter, right? Representative Carter. He's my representative for Texas in government. And he's looking at, I got all this money to come here from the federal government, Hamilton, water distribution, water main in Gaceville, soldier housing in Fort Hood. Now he's got one on here, $500,000 for Round Rock, which is right next door to me, Texas State University. Why is he giving these people $500,000? They got a brand new frickin' mansion of a building of brick, and their tuition rates are through the roof. Why do they get $5,000? So what do you think I'm going to ask Carter about?
Hey, why did you vote on that? Or why did you at that?
What did they say to you to make you give them that cash?
Yep.
They ain't voting for you. They hate you, man. They're liberals.
and maybe that's what it is. He's trying to sway the vote, which is
sway the vote.
But that's
with my money.
But that's
and your money,
right? So
that's taxpayer cash going there.
As a citizen, and I guarantee you, like if you pay your taxes like you're supposed to, what guarantee that you have that some part or all of your money did not end up supporting that? And you vehemently agree. Maybe you're the type of person like, I don't even want to go to college. I went to a trade school and I have a good.
Or should we be paying Ukraine's government their salaries, their infrastructure needs to keep their lights on? Why are we paying for that?
Yep.
They're not even in NATO.
Yep.
It's a whole bigger ball game. I'm telling you, wait until that crap's over. I think the greatest thing I ever heard a president say in my entire life was when President Trump was asked by CNN, who do you want to win this war? This is the first time, he's the first non-warmonger president. And here's what he said. I want everybody to stop dying. Nobody's winning anything. Lives are being devastated right now. And it can all stop today. Instead, we keep giving them money and there's no direction for peace anywhere. It's all a scam, man. It's gotta be. It's gotta be. And at one point, how do you use your voice for that?
You don't.
You vote. That's all we got left. You vote. Voting is force.
Yep.
Voting is making change. And that's our chance to shape government.
As a citizen, that is how you affect change. Right?
Exactly.
If you're gonna go stand around for hours, it would be much better for you to stand around for hours in a line going to a polling station than it would be for you to be on a street corner with a sign.
Well, yeah.
You'll have a lot.
Make that change there, if you don't, then what? You're going to bitch about the results?
Yeah, and that's the other part. If you don't vote, you can't bitch. Right?
Keep it to yourself, man.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Hey, this is Philosophy from the Frontline, episode number 73. We went a little bit long today, but I think it was a good topic. Feel free to reach out to us. I will drop a whole bunch of resources in the podcast description, some of the things that we talked about, where you can find balanced information. So Real Clear Politics is a great place to find information because it aggregates from both the left and the right and gives you a halfway decent projection. Again, it's not 100%, but it's better than, plugging into CNN all the time or plugging into Fox all the time. MSNBC is MSNBC is not your friend. C-SPAN is probably, if you're going to spend time watching something, watch C-SPAN because
Forbes News.
Yeah.
Those live footage, all of it.
Yeah. And so anytime you can find a source that's unedited, please tie into that because those sources like C-SPAN and Forbes News, they're taken straight from the camera feeds, right?
And unlike politicians, I think that everybody out there is smarter than you get credit for. You're smarter than the people that's delivering the news to you. You don't need them to interpret what's being said. Read the Constitution and do your own math.
Yep. You'll save yourself a lot of headache and a lot of frustration, because the reality of it is media companies are not designed to inform you. They're designed to sell mouthwash and dog food.
Facts.
So if you're watching the news, then you're getting a product that may not satisfy the actual requirement. Other than that, this is Rob and Dave for Philosophy from the Frontline, and we will catch you guys on the high ground. I hope you guys enjoy this. Happy New Year, and we will talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Later.
Thanks for listening to Philosophy from the Frontline with Rob Robinson. We will bring you more interesting veteran transition stories, veteran advocacy, and more information in veterans transition in general on a podcast platform near you. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.